In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Stigmata Studios presents The Jinn Jihad. The Jinn Jihad kicks your face with myths, mysteries, epic battles, suicide bombers, quirky characters, and divine power armor. In this epic graphic novel, the warrior archangels descend on a city in chaos. It's all-out war. The non-standard assembly battles an ancient terrorist organization and their ultimate weapon, a corrupted, magically enhanced, unstoppable monster, the Jinn. This graphic novel is a wild ride. It's one part distant Arab myth, one part Old Testament angelic vengeance, and one part unique heroic tough guys. Available on Amazon. Get more info on the Jinn Jihad and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
I will not wear a crown of gold where my Savior wore one of thorns. King of the North, 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 King of the North. King of the North.
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
All right, welcome to the Abercast. I gotta tell you, I'm revved up for Game of Thrones. New episode, by the time this is out, it will have already dropped. I was late to the game. I was late to the Game of Thrones. But it probably took me a month and a half to get through the 60 hours of television, and I'm up to speed. I'm trying to stay away from fan theories. I got like one or two other people that I talked to about it. I'm ready to fucking go. I'm ready to fucking go, everybody. Winter is here. So that's the little precursor to today's episode, because halfway through preparing it, I realized that I focused on some real Games of Thrones-y type of fucking shit. Tonight, we're going to explore this fascinating guy from history. He's one of the leaders of the First Crusade, and eventually he was sort of the king of Jerusalem, the protector of the Holy Sepulcher. So before we get started, I should say this episode actually connects to a few episodes that we've had in the past. It's kind of a precursor to the Cathar, the Albigensian Crusade episode, and also kind of a precursor to Vlad the Impaler and the Night Battle of Turgovista. It's kind of linked into those two episodes. Also, I just need to quickly point out that Fiends of the Flesh is now available in... It's an anthology that a friend of mine, David J. Fairhead, put together. There's some other folks in there that you might know. Nelson W. Pyles is in there. It's actually my first prose story that I ever wrote and published, so it's kind of off the bucket list for that. But it's all about a giant cockroach god, so, you know, you might not the whole book. My story is. It's called Fiends of the Flesh from Burning Ball Publishing. It's available on Amazon. I gotta tell you, I know you're like, how long have you been podcasting? Why is your shit all still fucked up? Well, I gotta tell you something. I feel like standing up. For right now, I feel like I gotta bring some energy to this proceedings. And that'll help a little bit. All right. Also, Prague rock band Novus just released an EP, and they were kind enough to have me do the cover. So it's heavy metal as fuck. It's like a tape recorder robot Norse god calling sound waves down like lightning. It's really cool. Check it out. Link's still in the show notes. Revenge in a Saloon Called Hell, my next comic. I got the editing proof back from Beta Reads, and that's on my list of shit to do this weekend, everybody, is I'm going to make some changes and submit to publisher. I'm going to submit to the printer. So, like I said, it's on my list of stuff to do. So, but first, I got to knock this fucking shit out of the way, so let's go. Mount up. Yeah, that's where I'm at. Mount up. Grab your bastard sword and let us ride. And I should say, the millennial warning. This one is probably going to be a little bit offensive to just about everybody. So just buckle up. You know, when you talk about the Crusades, you step on a lot of people's toes. So just be prepared. Be prepared for that, everybody. But don't check out until after like the first half or so. Let me at least tell like one of these stories that's not very offensive at all. Where am I at again? So mount up, grab your bastard sword, and let us ride into the midst of the Turk and the Arab and the Saracen. Tonight, we're going to talk about the legendary Crusader, Godfrey of Bouillon. Right after this. Godfrey of Bouillon, he gained fame by creating the Bouillon Cube. He lived from 1060 to 1100. He was a Frankish knight that led an army in the First Crusade. After the siege of Jerusalem, he was chosen to be the first ruler of Jerusalem. The first ruler of Jerusalem. He refused the title king and went by protector of the Holy Sepulcher. That was the cold open. He's a man of very few words, this guy. But folks still called him the Crusader King. He said that the story is he did not want to be called king in Jerusalem because that's where Christ wore a crown of thorns. So he said that he shouldn't be able to he didn't want to wear a crown of gold where his savior wore a crown of thorns. And the sepulcher, this Holy Sepulcher, I didn't actually know what it was. I had to look this thing up, but it's like this church in like the oldest part of Jerusalem. And I guess it's pretty big because it houses two of the holiest sites of Jerusalem. And, you know, when you pick these things apart, you try to figure it out. Like, it falls apart very fast. But It's said to contain the site of the crucifixion. What's in the Bible is called Calvary. Back in the day, it was called Golgotha, which Golgotha is a word that comes from an old word for shit. Because crucifixion, it took a long time to die from crucifixion, so people, like, there would be, like, these guys, they're fucking hanging up there for days, fucking just, you know, you gotta evacuate somewhere, so they named this hill after all this shit that these poor fucking bastards are shitting out. Golgotha. This is one of the clever things in, what's that fucking Kevin Smith movie with the angels and the demons? It's hard for me to watch it because whenever I have to imagine that Matt Damon is intelligent, my suspension of disbelief just falls apart. Like, I just can't fucking do it. That's why Team America World Police is my favorite Matt Damon movie, because it's like perfect casting. For the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. Everyone's out there yelling at me. It's not Chasing Amy. It's not Clerks. It's not Mallrats. It's not Jane Silent Bob Do America or whatever it was. Anyhow, that one, you know what I'm talking about. They had to fight a shit demon in there, and it was called the Golgotha shit demon. That's why. That's where this whole fucking thing comes from. Also, I'm way off script. This Holy Sepulcher also contains the site of Jesus' tomb, where the angels famously rolled away the stone. Okay, this guy, Godfrey, we're talking about, Godfrey of Bouillon, the creator of the Bouillon Cube. He was the son of Eustace II, the Count of Bouillon, and Ida, daughter of Lotharingian. It sounds like a planet where Hawkman comes from. Thanagarian. The daughter of a Thanagarian Duke Godfrey the Bearded. Despite his lineage, or his deeper lineage, gets way more interesting, though, as he is said to be an ancestor of the Knight of the Swan. The Knight of the Swan. You guys don't know who the Knight of the Swan is, bro? The Knight of the Swan is like the first superhero. And people are like, Superman's the first superhero, dipshit. And I'm like, just hear me out about this fucking Knight of the Swan guy. He's got a lot of things going on, like superheroes. He's like animal-based. He's got a secret identity. He's got a mysterious past. And he's totally badass. So just hear me out. I'll go through it. I'll go through it as fast as I can, but this story is Game of Thrones as fuck, though. So just hang in there. It's a long time ago, and there was this king, and he's making his rounds to all his cities, getting his shit together, and getting his men together so they could go to war, because Germany or some shit, Germany or somebody just declared war on him. So he's rounding up his army. So he and his court and this whole big production get to Antwerp. And he starts holding court, listening to people's grievances and whatnot, you know. This nobleman, Frederick of Telemonde, approached the king, and he was like, yo, we got some problems over here in Antwerp, king. And he starts to tell the story, like how the Duke had died, and he left Frederick to look after and to raise these two kids, Godfrey and Elsa. Now, there's going to be a lot of Godfreys in this story. And overall, this Godfrey that I'm talking about right now is not the Godfrey that created the Bouillon Cube. But he was the son of this Duke who had passed away, and he's got a sister named Elsa. So this Frederick guy was supposed to look after and raise these two kids until Godfrey was old enough to be the Duke. Secretly, though, Frederick wanted to marry Elsa himself and become the Duke. Anyways, but whatever. Frederick continues to the king, his spiel to the king. But he now thinks that Elsa wants the throne for herself because she and Godfrey went out riding but only she returned, and she wouldn't tell anyone what happened to her brother Godfrey. Frederick was like, well, after this, I think that she killed her brother, so after this, like, I can't get married to her. So he got married to Gertrude, whose father was once king of all these surrounding lands. See, Frederick had his eye on the larger throne anyways. Anyhow, it's important to know that Gertrude is secretly a wizard in this story. So Frederick straight up accused Elsa of murder. He was like, I, Frederick of Telramond, declare or accuse Elsa of murder of her brother. So the king called her up, and she wouldn't much answer the king's questions. She starts telling this story about this dream that she has about this swan and this knight, and this knight promised to defend her or some shit like that. And the king is not buying the story at all, and she now has to face this trial by combat. It's going to be her versus Frederick of Telramond, her accuser, because no one agreed to be her hero. They called out 3 times the city, and no champion arose for her. But then a swan swam up, and it was towing this little boat. And in this boat still stood a silver-clad knight. This knight disembarked his little boat, and he sang a song to his swan, and the swan took the boat back and disappeared, floating away, swimming away, whatever. Frederick and this knight of the swan battled, and Frederick handily lost. The swan knight refused, however, to kill this clown, and instead he and his wizard Gertrude were to be exiled. The swan knight The swan knight proposed to Elsa, and they were to be married. One caveat he had was she was never to ask him his name, who his family was, or where he comes from. He's basically like, yo, my awesomeness speaks for itself, so you're not allowed to ask me any of this stuff. And she agrees. She agrees to that. She was like, you are definitely like the fucking coolest thing that's happened in Antwerp for like 100 years. So I'm going to roll with you. So she agrees to that. He agrees to lead the king's army against Germany or whoever. And the king agrees to oversee the wedding and to throw a huge party. They wind up getting married. They get hitched. I don't know how, because it's like, do you, Swan Boy, take Elsa? Like, I'm not sure exactly how it works. None of the stories actually address this. Or, like, what she calls him, like, when they're just hanging out around the house. I don't know. Nobody knows. So they get married. But Gertrude and Frederick are still hanging around, and Gertrude casts a spell on Elsa, making her, I don't know, curious? I'm not exactly sure. Ravagingly curious? So in their bedchamber, after all the funny business happened, I'm sure, since we are talking about someone's ancestor, I mean, they had to do it, right? Anyhow, after the funny business, so she's, like I said, she's mad by this curiosity spell. So she asks the superhero who he is. Hey, man, who are you? Who's your family? Where'd you come from? And he's like, yo, you're not supposed to ask that. Remember, we went over this. And she insists. She was like, nay, negative, Ghost Rider. The pattern is full. You need to tell me who you are. Wouldn't it be cool to share with me everything? This is the fucking problem. This is the problem. She insists. Frederick and some of his men, after the Swan Knight busted, then Frederick and some of his men bust in. with their swords drawn. The Knight of the Swan battles all 5 men, and he slays them all. The next morning, the army's ready to go, because the Swan guy is supposed to lead the army. So they're ready to go. The king's ready to go. Everyone's ready to go. The court's ready to go. Everyone gathers just sitting around waiting for the Swan Knight. The Swan Knight shows up. And he's at his little... Oh, the Swan Knight the Swan shows up in his little boat. And the Swan Knight arrives. So the Swan Knight arrives, and the Swan and his little boat also show up at the same time. The knight goes on to explain that he slayed Frederick and his feeble henchmen for acting a fool, and that his name is actually Lohengrin. And he explains that he comes from a mystical land and lives in the Grail Castle as an order of knights sworn to protect the sacred Holy Grail, and that his dad is Percival, King Arthur's knight that found the Holy Grail. So he does come from a noble house. He does come from a glorified lineage, and he does have, this special mission or calling. He's everything these fucking people need to be. The power of the true God lets this knight leave to wed and to raise a family, and as long as his name and his land are kept a secret. But now, since his wife asked him, and he has to go, the wizard Gertrude interrupts, and she reveals that she was to blame for all of it. She was the one who cast the spell to make Elsa super curious. And it was she that made Godfrey disappear in the first place. Lohengrin, this is the Swan Knight's name, dropped to his knees, and he prayed, and a single dove flew out of the sky. He took this dove flying out of the sky to mean that his prayer had been answered. So he stands up and he goes to the swan in his little boat, and he unchains the swan, which instantly metamorphosized into the missing boy, Godfrey. And he gave Godfrey his magical weapons. Well, his magical weapon, I should say, and his horn, this horn that he blows. And he was like, here, one day you're going to be a duke, and no one can beat you if you wield this sword, and every man will heed your call if you blow this horn. Elsa was sad to see him go, but she was happy to have her brother back. And the knight got into the little boat, and the dove that flew out swooped down and grabbed the swan's little golden chain and pulled the boat towards the horizon. So this is the guy. This is when they tell the tales of Godfrey. They link this guy to being his ancestor, Godfrey of Bouillon. So I swear by the old gods and the new, that Swan Knight was like a gangster. Like, he rolled in the midst of turmoil. He married and fucked the most eligible bachelorette in Antwerp. He fucking sword fought a guy. He told the king what's what. He fucking partied, have a giant party. Fucked this Duchess chick. Basically giving him a throne. Murdered 5 fucking people, then told the king to go fuck himself, and jumped in a little boat and took off. Okay, so if you're one of the people that are worried about getting offended by the Crusades, this is probably about the part you want to tune out, because we're skipping right out of this fairy tale fucking shit, and we're getting right into the fucking meat grinder of the First Crusade bros. So, in 1095, Pope Urban II called for crusade to liberate the Holy Land. And there were other reasons. It's politically incorrect to talk about. No one fucking talks about it, but there are other reasons for this crusade. Reason number one, the Battle of Tours. These Muslims made it to the fucking middle of France 60 or 70 years before the First Crusade. They were an expansionist movement, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. It took this guy named Charles Martel. They call him Charles the Hammer because he fucking crushed these Muslims so hard in France. Battle of Tours. Look it up. Reason number two. The emperor, this is a little redundant, I'm sorry. I should say, I'm going to just change it. The ruler of the Byzantine Empire, his name is like Alexo XXO. The Byzantine Empire is getting fucking attacked by Muslims, and he asked for help. They, like I said, they are an expansionist movement by definition. So we're gonna get into some of these sieges and these battles where these knights go in and retake some of the towns, and because they go to Constantinople to rally first and then move towards the Middle East, the first couple towns that they attack and they lay siege on is there because it's not because of, I mean, let's be honest, but like they're moving in, but you'll find out like Nicaea, and Nicaea was originally a Byzantine town that was taken over. So just like, for further reference, see the They Might Be Giants song, Istanbul was Constantinople. Godfrey, who someone once said was more a monk than a warrior, sold his lands to build his army. The army of Godfrey of Bouillon. And they marched to rally at Constantinople. He was the second army to get there. There was like 5 or 6 of them, I guess. But it's important to say this, that calling this the First Crusade is kind of right, but it's also kind of wrong because a bunch of common people heard that they were going to do a crusade. So they started marching to the Middle East first. It's called the People's Crusade, and they got slaughtered. They barely got to Constantinople in the first place. But all along the way where they're marching, they're picking up these people. They're picking up like stragglers from the People's Crusade. So there's that. Where was I at? I put this fucking sheet down and it takes me so long. I write so tiny. Why do I write so tiny? Okay. So the first big victory, was the Crusaders taking back the city of Nicaea, which the Muslims took in 1085 from the Byzantine Empire. You see what I mean? So we move forth to the siege of Antioch. And this is the meat grinder, motherfucker. This is an epic siege, an epic battle. So our Crusaders show up at the walled city of Antioch. And they are vitally impressed. They had bad intel or something. They just totally underestimated the height and size of this wall. The wall not only went around the city, but it went around these 2 fucking mountains that were in front of the city. They used these mountains as also part of, you always want to tie this is a combat engineer talking, when you are setting up obstacles, you always want to tie them into terrain features, to incorporate that and to make it even that much more difficult. You see this in like the Battle of Thermopylae, where they use the hot gates, like the narrow corridor, to make everyone knows this now because of this movie, but to make their numbers count for nothing. But we've seen the same thing in, I guess I'm talking about ambushes, not so much mobility, counter mobility, but it's the same kind of principle. You want to use your lay of the land. This is going to come up later, a little bit later in this exact story. But when you're stretching out minefields, this is what you want to do: is you want to find the path most likely and then tie it into surrounding terrain features. You want to create these funnels, basically. So this is a way to do it by surrounding these things. Like, go just look up Siege of Antioch map on Google, and you'll see like the city is situated towards the rear, and these 2 mountains are in the front, and it's brilliant. I mean, it had to be like a shit ton of work. Like building a wall back then isn't, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know what I'm saying, bitch. So these guys, they build a bridge out of boats, which is interesting. Speaking of a combat engineer, this is something that combat engineers also do, is they float these pontoons down and they latch them together. And it's temporary, but it's very effective. Also, Xerxes did this when he invaded Greece. And I think this is even in that second 300 movie. I don't know. This is not a 300 commercial. I don't know, but I believe that they actually show something like this, and he's marching his army across these boats that are latched together across the street. Okay, so regular siege tactics were off the table. The Crusaders didn't have enough men to circle the city. When you're in a siege, that's what you do, is you circle the city. So instead, they try this blockade maneuver where each different of the army took a different door to the city, or I should say gate to the city. Door to the city sounds stupid. They take a different gate to the city or bridge, but they still didn't have enough people, and they just encamp in front of it. They can't open the gates because the fucking army's out there. But they didn't have enough men, and they didn't want to divide their forces to send some of them back over the river. There's like 2 gates on the far side of the river, but they would leave their men's dicks stranded out in the wind if they were to divide their forces and put them over on the other side. So they basically kept them from opening the doors that they could, and they couldn't even cover them all. They would divide their forces, and what's worse is winter is coming. This is in Syria, and these guys thought it was going to be hot all year, so they were pretty shocked when winter came. I can't fucking wait till Sunday. So eventually you have dudes starving because, these Crusaders show up and they just start, another thing that I say all the time, and I didn't invent this, someone else fucking said it, and I just keep saying it over again, is armies march on their stomachs. Armies march on their stomachs. So when they show up and they start just sapping the natural resources around this walled city, they're just fucking with their own livelihood, because it's like they're the ones that are going to have to eat. So dudes are starving. Horses are starving. They keep getting picked off by small harassing forces. So when it would be night, like they would sneak these dudes, like a strike force out of the gate, and they would go and like just hit them in their sleep. Not a big, huge confrontation, just something enough to just be like, take a couple guys away from them, damage their morale a little bit, and disappear into the night. This is what Sun Tzu would have told them to do. And all these guys started getting sick. During this also, now you have to understand, these are deeply religious, nay, superstitious men. During this long, miserable winter, these fucking guys saw a comet, they survived an earthquake, and they saw both of these things as divinely bad omens. At one point in time, they were getting drawn into a battle on 2 fronts. So this other force was like, we're going to come at them on this day. We're going to march up. We're going to get a couple miles away. We're going to camp out. Then on that day, we're going to attack them from this side. And because this blockade was so shitty, they were able to get word into the city. And so the guys running the forces inside the city were like, oh, well, on that day, we'll open up one of these gates and just hit them, causing these Crusaders to choose a front to fight on, dividing their forces. This is exactly the same thing as getting flanked, basically. Like but these guys, somehow they got word of this attack. And so they did something that was crazy. I think it was crazy. But this is where we talk about knowing your battlefield. This is situational awareness. and using the terrain to your advantage. Again, this is something that Sun Tzu would say to do. Use the terrain to your advantage at every fucking possible moment. So they were getting drawn into this battle on two fronts, and they decided to set out an ambush for the forces that were on their way to them. So they were on their way to, this force was on their way to Antioch. It was 12,000 men. The Crusaders sent 700 knights on horses. Just do that math in your head real quick. You got horses? Yeah. You got armor? Yeah. But there's still only 700 of you versus 1,200 fucking dudes. So this is the classic move. They chose part of the road that allowed them not to be able to get flanked. Their numbers count for nothing, like King Leonidas says. In this case, there was a river on one side and a lake on the other side. So this isn't just a matter of trying to run uphill to get high ground. It's literally you can't fucking surround them. It's impossible. So this was not a fight to the death. These guys, the Crusaders, scattered this army. They basically hit him. Boom. He kept he filled in his first fucking rank. He's divided them up into 6 squads, and he like aligned them up. In my head, I guess it's kind of like the way that the Romans would have done it, where they like line them up, and then they would just take turns to fall back. But I don't think they were nearly that organized. Whatever they did, they scattered this army. This army turned around, ran away, and these guys were able to steal a ton of horses and supplies while these guys were running away. They actually fucking chased them, tried to run them down. Meanwhile, at the city, these guys didn't get the word that the jig was up, so they launched their attack, thinking that their other pincher end was coming. They didn't know that these guys were fucked already. So they launched their attack, and then they got word that their other side was fucked. So they wound up retreating. And the Muslim forces who came out to do battle retreated back once they got word of the additional forces retreating. The Crusaders. So I don't know if Sun Tzu would have told him to do this. He was a big advocate for psychological warfare, but the Crusaders mounted heads on pikes surrounding the city. And then they wound up loading a bunch of dismembered heads into catapults, and they would fire the dismembered heads over the walls. So you see a lot of like apologists who are like, oh, while they were laying siege to these cities, they were suffering way more than the people inside. What's the level of suffrage? I mean, I don't know. Like, what's your tolerance? I'm not sure. They might have been physically suffering more, but look at the resolve of these people. They're starving. It's fucking freezing outside. It's raining all over them. And they're fucking busy cutting dudes' heads off and shooting them into the walls. In May of 1098, there was another army coming to aid them. The Crusaders had to get into the city before this army showed up. It was an army of 30,000 men strong. The Crusaders secretly started working with a tower guard, a spy in the city. He was a guard who was in control of one of the watchtowers. So what happened on this night, this guard lowered ropes down, and a giant contingent of the Crusaders climbed the walls, and they got into the city. Once they got into the city, they took control of the tower that they climbed up. They blew horns, and all fucking hell broke loose. It was a bloodbath. Armenian Christians inside the walls turned on the Muslim soldiers and started opening all of the gates. Within 24 hours, there was no Muslim left alive within the city. These guys just took it over. All right. So the Crusaders hung around Antioch for a while. But Godfrey's number one goal was to take Jerusalem. They started on the long journey to the Holy City. Upon seeing the city, many of the Crusaders cried, thinking of the long journey and the many battles that they had had and the siege that was to come. So, an important thing to remember while I'm setting up this whole siege of Jerusalem thing is at the time, Jerusalem had two walls. They had an inner and an outer wall. And the walls, like, the outer wall, I think, was like, I don't know, 15 meters. What's that in American? I'm not sure. 15 meters and like 3 meters deep. And these walls they also had gates. I think Jerusalem had 5 gates, and for each gate they had 2 watchtowers. And all of these watchtowers and stuff, they were just blocks piled one on top of each other, sealed with molten lead. They would dump molten lead in the cracks, like when you think about grouting or something like that. They would do that with molten lead to seal these fucking things together. So this is formidable. It was formidable. But yeah, just remember right now that there's an outer wall and there's an inner wall. The siege had a lot of the same problems, though, as the siege of Antioch. Now, they didn't just go from Antioch to here. They stopped along the way and sieged a couple other places, took over some other bullshit. But this siege had a lot of the same problems. They were lacking food, they were lacking supplies, and men were actually defecting. And once whoever was there was this Egyptian dude that was in control of the defenses of Jerusalem at the time. And as soon as he heard that they were coming, he did some funny stuff. One thing he did is he went and he poisoned all the wells and all the water sources outside the city except for one. And the one that he didn't poison was within arrow range of the tower. So these fucking guys would come to this one fucking spot, and these animals and stuff would come to this one spot to get water. It's the only source of water. And they would just get thumped upon by these arrows. And eventually their bodies and stuff would fall in and contaminate the water anyways. But I thought that was a really clever trick. Yeah, so he poisoned all this stuff. And then he also did this other thing where he, like, put bags full of cotton and stuff. I don't know if it's cotton. He put bags full of, like, cloth. It reminds me of, like, pillows or something all over the towers. Because he's like, if a rock comes, this will absorb some of the impact, which I find hilarious. Okay, so these guys, these Crusaders, they tried, like, this Jericho attack. They tried marching around the city in their bare feet, blowing trumpets and shit, hoping that the walls would fall down. And then there was this one Crusader this guy is he's a pretty interesting dude. His name is Peter the Hermit. I could probably do a whole show on him. One of the Crusaders, Peter the Hermit, gave wild ranting religious sermons, revving up these psycho knights ready to fight. So the problem is usually when you get to a place and you want to build a siege engine, you just cut a couple fucking trees down, you build a siege engine. You build a battering ram, you build some fucking catapults, because you're not going to drag this stuff with you on Crusade. You make the shit when you need it, and then you burn it to the ground when you're leaving. However, you're in the middle of the goddamn desert. There's no fucking trees. What are you going to do? So it was hard for them to, like, start building these items that they're going to need, these siege engines and stuff that they're going to need to get in there. So they send out, like, search parties and whatnot. And this one guy, because of this lack of water situation, they wound up drinking, like, shitty water from a marsh or something. And a lot of the guys suffered from dysentery. So this one guy, I can't remember his name, it's Tancrete or something like that, but he went to go shit in a cave for privacy, because he had this dysentery, and he found there was a bunch of logs in there, a bunch of prepared lumber, and he was like, yo, we could just use this shit right here. So it wasn't enough to build anything by itself, but it certainly helped. And then they wound up, like, dismantling some ships and stuff, and using using that wood to build these two beauties of siege towers. Now, these siege towers were 3 stories high. It's about 50 feet. And they had ladders built on the side of them, so the guys on the top can go in a bridge. So you once you get close enough to the wall, you throw the bridge down, you cross the bridge. Then there's these ladders, so the dudes that are in the 2 tiers under you can climb up the ladders to the top level, and they can go across the bridge. So they built 2 of these things, and they built some battering rams and some catapults. So they didn't have a whole lot of gear, but they had enough. And also, you have to think their army is diminishing. For every city they take, part of their army stays there. Like whoever claims Antioch will stay there to be like the king of there. And then his armies and his vessels and stuff will stay there. You know, and some other people might be like, I'm going to just fucking stay here. So as you go through and you take these other cities, your army is getting smaller and smaller. So I don't think I have numbers for this, but like, just keep that in mind. Like, it's these armies are getting tinier and tinier. Like, Godfrey Bouillon wasn't that big of a player. I mean, he had his own army, but he was not that big of a player in the Siege of Antioch. But as it gets towards Jerusalem, like, he's becoming more and more prominent as we go. That's why when I was telling the Siege of Antioch, I basically just snuck it in, because it's not really a Godfrey of Bouillon story. I just didn't mention whose fucking story it was. Anyhow, hold on. Okay, so eventually they scared up enough wood to build these 2 siege towers and these battering rams and these catapults that they need. They dismantled some boats. They stole some lumber in the village in the city next door. There was a guy who's trying to build a deck. They went and sold all his lumber. So they're getting their shit together because they were scared to death of this approaching army. So while they were building their tower, they also had a ditch to deal with. I don't know if I mentioned, but there was like a dry moat around, like to fuck even more up with these siege towers and stuff. So they were fucking around for so long, they filled in the parts of the moat with rocks. They would just throw rocks in there and like fill in. It's just kind of like it's just like a highway in Pittsburgh with these fucking potholes. All right, so they're building these siege engines and they roll them into place. So the defenders can see where they're going to come over, right? Because they're like, okay, if the siege engine's being here, then we can like put our catapults and stuff in place to attack these siege engines. So there was one guy, I think he was to the north, and I think our dude Godfrey was to the west. I could be wrong about that. Tower of Babel or Tower of David or something like that. That's where he's planning on going over. So they have all their shit ready, and they're getting like their fires and stuff ready to go, and they got like all their catapults and their rocks and all their ammunition set up ready to go, and then night falls. So the defenders inside Jerusalem set up their defense because they know the tower's right there. They know where the offense is. But what Godfrey does, Godfrey calls an audible. And he was like, well, now they know where all my shit is. So he orders, this is fucking crazy, by the way. He orders his men in the dead of night to take apart all of their equipment, move it like a click down the road to a different gate or to a different part of the wall that's less defended, because their defense is set up for this. I showed you what I'm going to do. They set their defense up for that. And then once night fell, he was like, all right, break all this shit down, move it, click down the road, and reset it up. You got until dawn, because that's he and this other force that was on the north side of the city's like, at dawn, we're going to fucking go. Imagine the pressure that he's got. He's probably down there hammering fucking shit in himself too, like to get this stuff working. So they broke all their stuff down, moved it down the street, start rebuilding it. So the sunrise starts coming up, and the defenders are looking, and they're like, "Hey, where's the siege tower?" And over here, a click down the road, he's like, "Booyah! Bam!" He attacks them, and he doesn't even attack them like he's supposed to. He was like, "Hey, man, instead of sending the siege tower for the outer wall, I want you to blast the outer wall with the battering ram." So they take this battering ram and they crush through the outer wall with this battering ram. Everyone was fucking shocked when he did it. They were like, "What the fuck?" They actually hit the inner wall with the battering ram. They had to burn it in place because it got jammed in there. Once it got burned and got destroyed sufficiently, they were able to wheel up this siege tower. They fucking rolled it right over, boom, 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 through the first wall, right into the second wall. It's basically like a hug with knives and swords. They rolled right up there, dropped the bridge, jumped in. The guys on the north side heard that these dudes got through, so they divided their forces, and they were already lost at this point. As soon as they divided their forces, as soon as Godfrey of Bouillon got into that first wall, it was over. Now, the impressive part was he's got these two brother knights with him, and his like cousin or something. The guy who shit in the cave was with him as well. They themselves were riding on the top level, 50 feet up, on this rickety fucking thing that they just built, taken apart, rebuilt, and rolled into a fucking war zone. They were on the top level of this thing. He's like riding it in, like fucking Pico's pill or something. Bridge drops. They go in and, yeah, okay, so in the first assault, Godfrey himself rode one of the siege towers, and on the night of the 14th, he made it over the wall, and his army took the city. And on July 22nd, he was named the protector of the Holy Sepulcher. He only lasted in power for like a year. There was a lot of shit talking about how he passed away. Some people say he got shot with a poison arrow. Some people say he ate a poison apple. Some people say that some fucking buddy poisoned his drinks or something. But we don't really know. No one really knows. No one really knows what happened to him. He might have just got sick and died. All the poison bullshit comes from the Muslim side, which might be telling. I don't know. Is it? I'm not sure. I am not sure.
Stigmata Studios presents The Scorpion Strikes. In this comic book, a terrorist called the Scorpion is transported to a secret CIA prison. He quickly turns the tables on the guards and administrators and releases the prisoners. A well-armed anarchist called Constituent Zero assembles a team and fights to take the prison back. The story is a dark political action thriller. The Scorpion's actions set the stage perfectly for the Jin Jihad. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com. Stigmata Studios presents The Test of the Scorpion. In this comic book, While the Jin Jihad is raging on one side of the city, the terrorist called the Scorpion sets a secondary attack in motion as he obtains a small tactical nuclear bomb. A mysterious, ever-living warrior called Cyrus the Dead Guy steps forward to test the faith of the Scorpion and his lunatic followers. This is an action-adventure story. It's a bit of swashbuckler that wraps up the Jihad stories. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on the Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, the Test of the Scorpion, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
Hey, all right. So thank you guys for hanging in. I had a lot of fun telling these stories to you. I hope I redeemed myself from my shitty mood last week and the awful story that I had to tell. But I had a lot of fun with this, even though this one is way more awful. I mean, if you put it into context, but, whatever. Fucking sue me. The important stuff for me is I would like you guys to leave a rate and review on iTunes, which still none of you have fucking done. Let's get this shit over with. I'll give you a fucking shout out on the thing if you just fucking do it. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to do that and you have a ton of disposable income, you can always buy a bunch of comic books. That'll help support the show, as we're I'm the guy who does the podcast and the comic books, so any of that will help. If you just want to reach out to me and be like, yo, hey, nice job, bro, on Twitter or Facebook, like, you can find me on stigmatastudios.com. All my social media links and all that stuff are like up in the corner. If not, they're usually Stigmata Studios / Insta, whatever, Twitter, yada, yada. So without beating that fucking thing to death, also there's a newsletter out there. If you guys want to join the newsletter, I give you tons of free shit before I start asking you to buy comic books. So there's that. So get involved, and we all want to hear from you and all that stuff, you know? So it's like, I'm just waiting on you, bro. I'm waiting on you. We're going to leave tonight actually with a new Leave Tonight song from a band called Soda Jerk. This is a song called Betty Ford Pickup, and I love it. So here we go. They said that I could play it, so here we go. Are you ready? Guys, thanks for listening. I love you. I just want to get to know you a little bit better. Please tell me.
Now back to Soda Jerk so they can play us out with one of the best titles of a song I've heard in a long time, Betty Ford Pickup.
Play us out? What does that mean?
Well, tonight I'm gonna hit every joint in town. 'Cause I got nothing left to lose ever since you stopped coming around. Well, I'm always wrong, and I guess I've always been. How can I go on knowing that I will never win? 'Cause I feel sick and I feel bored. I wouldn't quit if you were Betty Ford. I like to drink myself to sleeplessness and smoke until I'm out of breath. 'Cause I know you'll be leaving me again. I hardly know her, but I'm sure that will change. 'Cause ever since I let you down, I ain't never been much as I love to drink. Yeah, 'cause I feel sick, and I feel bored.